Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are not talking about gossip, fantasy, or cheap fear. We are talking about a warning. And that warning begins in a courthouse basement in West Virginia. The building itself was nothing special. Red brick, narrow windows, old pipes in the walls. The kind of place where forgotten records sit for decades under dust and leaking ceilings. One spring afternoon, a young archivist named Megan Holloway was sorting through probate files, church deeds, and military pension papers when she found a sealed cedar box shoved behind a row of damaged ledgers. There was no official label on it, no family name, no county stamp. Only one thing had been written across the lid in fading black ink: 2026. Inside was a worn notebook, a few loose pages, and several weather sketches drawn by hand. The notebook was signed by a man almost nobody remembered anymore. His name was Elias Mercer. In old mountain towns, Mercer's name had not completely disappeared. Some people still repeated stories about him in quiet voices. They said he once warned a rising political figure to leave Washington before powerful enemies destroyed him. They said he predicted a flood season years before the riverbanks failed. They said he wrote about a future year when heat, fear, and division would strike the country at the same time. Normally, that would sound like folklore. But Mercer's notebook did not read like folklore. It read like a calm man trying to leave a message before people were too distracted to listen. He wrote about a nation that would still look stable from the outside while something deeper had already begun to crack. He wrote about heat that would exhaust the land, water that would return with violence, and a society so dependent on comfort that it would mistake routine for safety. And at the center of it all was one year, 2026. Maybe it was symbolism. Maybe it was coincidence.
Folklore at all.
Or maybe a man long dead had seen something most people were still refusing to face.
It's a
Elias
warning
Mercer
from
did not
someone
look
who
like the
knew
kind
they
of
would
man
be
history
ignored.
would remember. He was not famous. He never led a movement. He did not build a church empire or travel the country filling auditoriums. By all accounts, he lived quietly in the hills of eastern Tennessee in the late 19th century. He repaired fences for neighbors, helped widows carry firewood, kept handwritten weather journals, taught Sunday lessons in a small white church near the county line. He wore plain coats, walked slowly, spoke less than most men. That was part of what made him difficult to dismiss. He did not act like a performer. He acted like someone paying attention. Local people said Mercer had a strange gift. He could look at a season, a piece of land, or a family conflict and see where it was headed before anyone else did. He did not describe that as magic. He called it pattern. He believed most disasters do not arrive without warning. They begin quietly, in the soil, in the weather, in the language of public life.
Thank you, Elias.
In the way powerful people start behaving when they think they will never be held accountable. In the way ordinary people slowly stop noticing what matters. Mercer wrote that people often say a crisis came out of nowhere because they do not want to admit how many signs they ignored beforehand. That idea stayed with people, not because it was mystical, because it felt true. In rural America, where people live closer to weather, land, and practical consequences, they tend to remember the rare person who tells the truth before it becomes obvious. Mercer became that kind of figure. Not universally loved, not universally believed, but remembered. And then one case changed the way people spoke about him forever. A frightened young man, connected to powerful circles in Washington, came to Mercer in secret because he believed he was living on borrowed time. That visit turned Mercer from local legend into something else, something harder to explain, because what he said next did not just save one man. It changed the course of an entire family. The man's name was Jonathan Hale. He was young, ambitious, and already close enough to national politics to understand how danger really works in America. Not always with gunfire, not always in public. Sometimes it comes through ruined reputations, silent betrayals, legal pressure, vanished allies, and doors that close one by one until there is nowhere left to stand. Jonathan had every reason to be afraid. His older brother had died after a bitter political dispute that powerful men insisted was unfortunate, but natural. Jonathan did not believe them. Neither did his wife. In private, people stopped speaking freely around him. Conversations changed when he entered a room. Invitations disappeared. Smiles grew too careful. He knew what that meant. So one cold November evening, he sent a trusted friend into the Tennessee hills to find Elias Mercer. The messenger arrived after dark. He found Mercer near his woodpile under a lantern, splitting oak for the coming winter. There was no grand introduction. The man explained the situation plainly. A dead brother, dangerous rivals, a family at risk. No safe path forward. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Where does a man go when staying means death, but leaving means losing everything? Mercer did not answer right away. He listened. He looked out toward the long blue line of the mountains. Then he said quietly, "Go beyond the ridge. Build your life where proud men do not yet see value. That is where your children will survive." That was all. No long prophecy, no performance, just one clear sentence. Jonathan understood the meaning immediately. Within weeks, he resigned his post, claimed health reasons, and took a remote appointment in northern Arkansas, then considered rough country by men in eastern power circles. Many people thought he had been exiled. Some pitied him, but exile became protection. His children grew there, land was bought, farms were built. A new branch of the family took root in a place that gave them room to breathe. A bloodline that would likely have been crushed in the capital found safety in a place powerful people had overlooked. Years later, people called it a smart move, but the family remembered it differently. They believed Elias Mercer had seen the danger before it fully arrived. And that was only the first reason Americans kept repeating his name. The second story is the one that made even skeptics uncomfortable. By then, Elias Mercer had been dead for years. His home had fallen apart, but a small chapel still stood near the hillside where he had once preached. It was a modest place. White wood siding, tin roof, narrow pews, wildflowers planted out front by local women every spring. Nothing grand, but it mattered to people. Then the state sent in Thomas Whitaker. Whitaker was a respected engineer from Ohio, well-educated, highly efficient, deeply confident in modern progress. He had been put in charge of a canal project meant to improve drainage and protect nearby farmland. On paper, the route was excellent. In reality, it cut straight through Mercer's old chapel. Local people begged him to reroute the line. Pastors asked respectfully. Farmers argued from memory and tradition. Older residents said the site should not be disturbed. Whitaker dismissed all of it. He told them public works could not be halted by superstition. He said infrastructure mattered more than local sentiment. He insisted the project would move forward. The demolition crew arrived on a gray morning. They removed the front steps, pulled loose floorboards. Then, beneath the pulpit area, one worker struck stone. The men cleared away dirt and found a flat limestone slab buried under the foundation. It had clearly been placed there intentionally. When they washed off the mud, engraved words appeared. Witnesses later told the story the same way. Whitaker bent down to read the inscription. Then everything in his face changed. The message named the exact decade of the canal work. It described a man of rank trying to break the chapel for water. And it ended with a line that locals never forgot. "If you tear this house down for utility, raise it again for mercy." Now, maybe that stone had another explanation. A skeptic could say it was added later. A prank, a dramatic local invention. But one fact no one disputed was this. Whitaker stopped the demolition immediately. He rerouted the canal. And with his own money, he helped rebuild and expand the chapel rather than destroy it. That story spread for one reason. It suggested that a man who trusted only engineering and law had, for one moment, come face to face with something he could not explain. And that left a mark. When people finally studied Mercer's notebook closely, they noticed something important. He did not begin with flood. He began with heat. Not a normal hot summer. Oh, not the kind of seasonal discomfort Americans complain about before turning the thermostat down. He wrote about heat that lingers too long, pushes too hard, and starts changing the behavior of everything it touches. Soil, crops, reservoirs, power systems, tempers, families, mercy itself. He described fields splitting open under a sky that offered no relief. He described cattle standing in dry pasture with nowhere cooler to go. He wrote of towns where air conditioning still hummed, but the land outside was already telling a different story. In his view, the real danger was not just heat itself, it was prolonged strain. That part feels disturbingly modern, because that is how crisis often enters American life, not in one theatrical moment, but as cumulative pressure. Water restrictions, crop loss, rising utility bills, our grid instability, insurance problems, supply disruptions that seem temporary until they are not. Mercer believed people in prosperous societies are especially vulnerable to this kind of danger because they mistake convenience for permanence. If grocery stores stay open, highways still work, and screens still glow, they assume the system is healthy. But heat exposes hidden weakness. It tests what the land can still produce. It tests what infrastructure can still support. It tests how quickly modern confidence becomes dependence. Still, there is a reasonable objection. Extreme weather is not prophecy. It is climate, policy, planning, and science. That is true. But Mercer's strength was never that he described weather in mystical language. His strength was that he understood consequences. He believed land pushed too hard would eventually stop cooperating. He believed people who treat nature only as a resource would one day act shocked when it answered back. His most unsettling point was simple. When the ground starts cracking, illusions crack with it. And once people begin begging for rain, they often imagine water will arrive as mercy. Mercer thought that was the next mistake, because in his warning, water did come, just not in the way people hoped. Mercer's flood pages are harder to listen to because they feel less symbolic. He wrote about rain that does not restore balance, rain that overwhelms it. He described a season when the country, exhausted by heat, would welcome dark clouds too quickly. People would look at the sky and think relief had arrived. But instead of healing the land, the water would expose everything that had already been weakened. Low fields would drown, roads would vanish, drainage systems would fail. River towns would discover how thin the line is between normal life and total disorientation. Mercer paid special attention to working regions of the country, Delta farmland, Gulf communities, smaller American towns that depend on one river, one highway, one harvest, one processing plant. He understood something modern commentators often miss. A disaster does not need to destroy a major city to shake a nation. Sometimes it hits the places that quietly feed, supply, or stabilize the rest. In his notes, the most painful damage was not only property loss, it was the collapse of trust. When roads disappear, help slows. When help slows, rumors spread. When rumors spread, fear enters every kitchen. People stop asking what is true. They ask what feels safest. That is where crisis becomes social, not just environmental. Mercer described floodwater pushing inland into places that had counted on distance as protection. He described farmland turning brackish, wells becoming unreliable, fishing communities watching familiar waters become hostile. He wrote like a man who knew that water can destroy slowly as well as violently. It can ruin one season, then another, until whole families discover that recovery was a word people used before they understood the scale of loss. Again, no honest person has to call that prophecy. It is also practical reality. Bad infrastructure, overbuilt land, weak planning, exhausted systems, those are real things. But Mercer's deeper point was this. When one hardship follows another, people begin losing choice. And when choice narrows, character becomes easier to see. That is why he turned next to something even more unsettling than weather. Not what nature does to people. What people do to one another once fear settles in. According to Mercer, the most dangerous part of a national crisis is not always the storm, it is what happens after.
Here's a blanket.
He believed Americans are strongest when they still remember how to act like neighbors, when they still know how to share, organize, tell the truth, and help without turning every emergency into spectacle. But he worried that modern life had made people more connected digitally and less reliable morally. That fear runs through the notebook. He imagined a country where information moves faster than judgment, where people see 10 alerts and trust none of them, where a frightened family with a full phone battery can still make a disastrous decision because every message contradicts the last. He wrote of a time when false confidence would become more persuasive than careful truth. That sounds less like prophecy than everyday life. And maybe that is why it matters. Mercer understood that disaster multiplies through confusion. A delayed shipment becomes panic buying. Panic buying becomes scarcity. Scarcity becomes anger. Anger becomes blame. And suddenly the crisis is no longer only about heat or water. It becomes about whether people can still think clearly when they are afraid. He was especially critical of money as a substitute for wisdom. Not because resources do not matter. They do. But because wealth often creates false confidence. He believed many comfortable people mistake possession for preparedness. A large house is not resilience. A stocked garage is not moral steadiness. A secure account is not the same as knowing how to stay calm, tell the truth, and help another family when your own nerves are failing. Mercer wrote that hard times strip away the glamour of self-protection. Under enough pressure, people discover what was real. Who can share? Who can endure? Who can still act decently without applause? That was the deeper crisis in his notebook. Not just failing systems, failing instincts. And that led him to his hardest argument of all, that America's greatest weakness might not be natural disaster. It might be spiritual exhaustion. Mercer did not think the country was in danger only because of weather. He thought it was in danger because too many people had started mistaking noise for strength. That distinction matters. He wrote about a society that still looked powerful. Busy highways, full stores, new homes, expanding suburbs, political speeches, financial headlines, religious language, national pride. On the surface, everything still moved. But underneath, he saw fatigue, moral confusion, loneliness, vanity. A country with plenty of machinery and less inner stability than it imagined. He was not condemning America as uniquely evil. He was describing a familiar pattern in powerful societies. When comfort grows, gratitude often shrinks. When convenience grows, patience often shrinks. When everything becomes fast, people stop asking whether it is still good. Mercer believed that was happening in the American character. People had become louder but not wiser. More expressive but less honest, richer in tools, poorer in self-control. Even faith in his eyes was in danger of becoming performance instead of practice. That is a hard claim. And there is a fair counterpoint. America is also full of generosity, of ordinary sacrifice, of parents working long hours, of volunteers showing up after storms, of churches, food banks, nurses, teachers, linemen, mechanics, and neighbors who quietly keep communities alive. Mercer knew that too. His notebook is not pure condemnation. It is a warning about drift. He feared a country that still praised virtue in public while slowly neglecting it in private. And in his mind, that kind of neglect always has a cost. Because when real pressure arrives, people do not rise to whatever slogan they repeated in easier years. They fall back on what they actually practiced. That is the test he believed was coming. Not just a test of infrastructure, a test of conscience, a test of whether Americans still knew how to stay human when comfort disappeared. That is why the final section of his notebook mattered so much. It was not about exact body counts. It was about separation, what would collapse, what would endure, and what kind of people would still be standing when the noise finally burned off. This may be the most important part of the story, because by the end of the notebook, Mercer was no longer focused on storms. He was focused on sorting. He wrote that when real pressure comes, Much of what people trust will fall away. Not everything at once, not in one dramatic scene, but steadily. Public confidence, vanity, false security, selfish habits, on hollow institutions. Relationships built only on comfort. Systems held together by denial. He believed crisis reveals the difference between appearance and substance. That is the heart of his warning. A person can look strong in easy years. A town can look healthy. A family can look secure. But when fear enters, the truth comes out quickly. Some people become cruel. Some become smaller. Some collapse because they were never truly strong. They were simply comfortable. Mercer believed the first things to fail would be greed, arrogance, and the illusion that money can solve every problem. Those forces seem powerful in good times. But under genuine pressure, they break fast. They do not know how to suffer. They do not know how to share. They do not know how to build trust. What lasts longer is different. A steady mother, a dependable neighbor, a pastor who opens the fellowship hall before being asked, a mechanic who fixes a stranger's truck for free, a family that shares water before it knows where the next case will come from, a community that keeps telling the truth when lies would be easier. Mercer believed the future belongs to those people, not the loudest, not the richest, the most useful, the most decent, the most able to remain human when life becomes hard. That was the real meaning of his warning. Not doom for its own sake, not empty fear, a hard filtration, a stripping away of what never had roots in the first place. And if that was true, then his final message was not really about disaster at all. It was about choice, about the kind of person a nation becomes before the crisis fully arrives. So what was Elias Mercer really trying to say? Not that the world would end in one dramatic year. Not that every image in his notebook should be taken literally. And not that people should sit in fear, waiting for headlines to prove him right. His message was more difficult than that. He believed that collapse begins long before the visible breaking point. It begins when people grow numb, when they stop listening, when they lose gratitude, when they care more about appearance than truth. When comfort matters more than character. By the time the obvious crisis arrives, the deeper crisis may already have been unfolding for years. That is why his warning still matters. It is not only a prediction story, it is a character story. What kind of people are we becoming while life still feels mostly normal? Hey, what do we value when nothing important has been taken from us yet? If the pressure comes, what in us will remain steady enough to help someone else? That is the real question Mercer leaves behind. Because survival is never only about supplies, land, money, or timing. Those things matter. Of course they do. But they are not enough by themselves. Every family, every town, every country is eventually tested by something larger than convenience. And when that day comes, the essentials become surprisingly simple. Can you stay calm? Can you tell the truth? Can you help someone weaker than you? Can you choose decency when fear would make selfishness easier? Maybe that is the true purpose of the warning. Not panic, preparation, not superstition, reflection, not the end of everything, sigh. A final chance to decide what is real before life decides for us. That is where this story ends. But maybe the better question is where it begins. If this message stayed with you, subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this video with someone who may need to hear it.